He rode to take her father's land, but the girl offered herself, instead whispering, "Just spare him." Montana Territory, early spring, 1885. The fog rolled in thick from the east, swallowing the hills in silence. The air smelled of pine, frost, and distance. Caleb Vane rode slowly through it, his horse's breath ghosting in the cold. He was 31, broad-shouldered beneath a faded military coat, a revolver resting on his hip. From his saddlebag, the corner of a folded paper jutted out a land title stamped by the federal office in Helena. 80 acres, bought with clean money, claimed by right. He had told himself this a dozen times on the way here. He wasn't stealing, he was taking what was legally his. The war had taught him to believe in things written, sealed, and signed, not the stories of who came first, or who had worked harder. Ahead, a fence line appeared through the mist, half-rotted but still standing. Beyond it, a cabin slumped against the rise of a small hill. The place looked tired, chimney-leaning, roof patched with tin and hope, yet from it rose a faint thread of smoke, thin and stubborn. He dismounted, boots sinking into the damp ground. The world was quiet except for the slow creak of saddle leather and the wind breathing through the grass. He walked toward the porch. Someone stepped into view. At first, he thought it was a boy. Then the fog lifted, and he saw her. A young woman, no older than her mid-20s, thin, with the kind of strength that came from work, not privilege. Her dress was faded, the hem frayed, her hands raw with labor. Strands of chestnut hair had come loose from a braid that fell to her shoulder. She stood squarely before him, eyes wide and red from crying. Caleb stopped, one gloved hand resting on the document inside his coat. "I'm looking for Jeremiah Dunn," he said. "This is his homestead?" Her voice cracked when she answered. "It was." He nodded slightly. "Then he'll want to see this." She didn't move. The wind caught her braid and pushed it across her face. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft it nearly disappeared into the fog. "Please," she said. He frowned. "Ma'am?" She swallowed hard. "Please, just spare him." He blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "Take me instead." The paper stayed in his pocket. His hand fell to his side. She stood trembling, though her eyes did not fall. There was no shame in her voice, only desperation, a fierce, quiet kind that refused to break. Caleb looked past her toward the cabin. Smoke still rose from the chimney. Someone was moving inside. A shadow bent over, slow and deliberate. "Your father's here," he said. She nodded. "He's sick. The doctor says his heart can't take another winter." Her lips trembled. "If you make him leave, it will kill him." Caleb exhaled slowly. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I bought this land. Fair and by law." She took a step forward, her boots sinking into the mud. "The law doesn't know what this place cost us." Her voice shook now. "He cleared it himself, dug every post hole. He built that roof with his own hands." Caleb's gaze dropped to her hands, blistered, nails rimmed with dirt. The cuffs of her sleeves were patched with mismatched thread. "You're his daughter," he said quietly. "Rosalind. Rosalind Dunn." She nodded. Her eyes were bright, raw, and steady. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind, carrying the faint rattle of a barn door somewhere beyond the fog. Caleb finally said, "I'm not a man who takes people's homes for pleasure." "Then don't take this one," she whispered. "Take me. Let him stay on the hill till he's gone. He has nowhere else." He stepped back, uneasy. "I don't buy people." "I didn't say you had to," she answered. "Only, spare him." Her words lingered in the air like smoke. Caleb turned slowly toward his horse. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. Rosalind didn't move, didn't thank him. She simply stood there, a pale figure in the fog, her hands clenched at her sides. As he mounted and rode away, he glanced once over his shoulder. The cabin was barely visible now, just a dark blur against the white. But her voice stayed with him, low and pleading, threading through the mist like a prayer he couldn't forget. "Please, Just spare him, take me instead." The morning sun cracked through the trees, scattering light across the rim of the ridge, where the soil turned rocky and thin. Caleb Vane stood beside the horse he'd tethered at the edge of the Dunn property line, the legal deed unfolded in his hand. He had returned, as promised. The cabin looked even smaller in daylight, sagging in places. Chickens pecked near a crooked porch. A field of barley rippled in the breeze, its furrows uneven, worked by hands without the luxury of tools. From the door came a man, thin, sun-darkened, leaning heavily on a walking stick. His white hair stuck to his temples in streaks, and his breath wheezed with each step. But his eyes, pale and sharp, watched Caleb like a hawk. "You must be done," Caleb said. "Jeremiah," the old man replied. Caleb held out the document. "This land was reassigned by the federal office last fall, purchased legal by auction. I'm just here to settle it proper." Jeremiah didn't even glance at the paper. "I dug every damn root on this hill with my own hands. My wife died on this land. She's buried out by the willow. That paper doesn't mean anything to me." Caleb stiffened. "I respect your work. But the law stands." "The law didn't break its back hauling stones for 12 winters," Jeremiah said quietly. From the barn, Rosalind emerged carrying a bundle of firewood. She paused when she saw them, her eyes moving from the paper in Caleb's hand to her father's clenched jaw. She said nothing, just kept walking toward the house. Caleb noticed the tremble in her hands. One of her fingers was wrapped in a cloth strip, stained with dried blood. Her sleeves were unevenly stitched, patched with old flour sack. Even the horse hitched beside the barn looked underfed. They weren't holding on to the land out of pride, they simply had nowhere else to go. That night, Caleb returned to his canvas tent, pitched just beyond the southern line where the government surveyor had hammered in a boundary post. He made a small fire, boiled coffee, and let the silence work on him. Just past dusk, he heard soft footsteps. He turned. Rosalind stood at the edge of the light, holding a tin plate wrapped in cloth and a small jar. "I brought you something," she said. He hesitated, then stepped back to let her closer. She placed the plate on a stump beside his fire. "Baked it this morning. Cornmeal and honey, and coffee. Not much, but—" She trailed off. Caleb nodded. "Thank you." She lingered, arms crossed, fingers rubbing her elbows. Her braid was looser tonight. A strand fell against her cheek, and she didn't brush it away. "Your father's a proud man," Caleb said after a pause. Rosalind's voice was low. "He built this place from nothing, every inch of it. After Mama died, he just kept building." Silence stretched again. The fire popped. Then she said it, soft but certain. "If you take this land, he'll die." Caleb swallowed. She took one step forward. "But if I stay, if I come with you, could you let him keep the upper ridge? Just that." Caleb stared at her. "You're not a thing to trade." "I'm not trading, I'm asking." He stepped back. "I don't buy people." "I know." They stood like that, the flames flickering between them. Then Caleb picked up the plate of cornbread and quietly took a bite. Rosalind exhaled. "I should go," she said. Caleb didn't move to stop her. But he didn't call the sheriff either. And when she disappeared into the dark, he watched the place where she'd stood long after the fire went cold. The dawn came cold, the kind that seeped through canvas and settled in the bones. Caleb Vane sat inside his tent, the parchment of land rights crumpled between his fingers. He had studied it a dozen times since arriving, each line etched with official stamps, legal jargon, dates, and a single name, his. It was supposed to be simple: land bought fair, claimed legal. But nothing about this land felt simple now. He stared at the outline of the ridge beyond the canvas flap, where smoke curled from the Dunn's chimney. A part of him, the soldier who followed orders, who drew clean lines and enforced them, told him to evict them, move forward. Another part, quieter but deeper, held the image of Rosalind's eyes the night before. Her voice had not been angry. It had been raw, empty of fight, full of something harder to name. That afternoon, Caleb rode into town, boots stirring dust along the path to the blacksmith's forge. The man at the anvil, shoulders broad, beard streaked with gray, looked up when he entered. "You vain?" the blacksmith asked. Caleb nodded. "I'm staying out near the Dunn place." The man grunted. "Lot of history on that land. I heard Jeremiah Dunn's a hard man." "He's a good one," the blacksmith said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Fed drifters during the drought, buried 2 of his own kids out there, never asked for help, just kept the land going." Caleb let that settle. "You think I'm wrong to be there?" "I think paper and sweat don't measure the same," the blacksmith replied, "but it's not for me to say." Outside, the wind picked up. Caleb mounted his horse, heart heavier than when he'd arrived. That evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the ridge, he saw her again. Rosalind was down by the river, leading their only horse through shallow water. The animal limped. She paused to rest it, one hand brushing its mane. Her sleeves were torn again, her braid loose, her feet bare. She didn't see him watching. He realized then, she wasn't young enough anymore to wait for something better. Whatever chances she might have had, love, home, security, had been traded for sunburnt days and nights tending to a father who barely walked. She had come to offer herself not out of affection or desperation, but out of resignation. That truth struck Caleb harder than any bullet. The next morning, Caleb returned to the southern boundary of the land. He didn't know what he'd say, if anything. But the scene before him made him stop short. Rosalind stood by the old fence, hammer in hand, driving a new stake into the soil. Her sleeves were rolled. Her face was set in determination. But the line she was building was wrong. One of the posts had been placed just 2 feet past the government marker, technically, onto land now listed as Caleb's. He dismounted. She didn't flinch when she saw him, just kept hammering. "I know it's yours," she said, not looking at him. "I'm not asking to keep it. I just need more time." The hammer dropped to her side. She wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, cheeks flushed from the morning heat. "My father's breathing easier again. I've got to get one more harvest in before frost. After that, we'll go." Caleb didn't speak right away. He looked at the post, then at her, hands blistered, jaw tight, standing as if expecting him to shout. But he didn't. He simply nodded once. Rosalind blinked, unsure if she had imagined it. She picked up the hammer again, slower this time, her body relaxing just enough to show relief. Caleb turned and walked back to his horse. No words exchanged, no promises made, just a quiet accord, rooted not in law but in something steadier, something steel-like. The wagon that rolled into the valley was painted deep green, with brass trim and a polished emblem from Philadelphia carved into the side. The horses were glossy, the driver wore gloves, and inside sat a man who carried the scent of cigar smoke and inked contracts. Morgan Vane had arrived. He was Caleb's cousin, older by 2 years, and far wealthier. A land-baron son from back east who made deals over whiskey and watched maps like a hungry hawk. He had bankrolled Caleb's land claim with a single condition. Once the Dunns were off the land, it would be sold to him, tied into a larger acquisition plan for the valley. That was the deal. But Morgan saw hesitation now in Caleb's eyes. The day he arrived, he stepped out of the wagon in his city boots and looked around with distaste at the hills, the patched-up fences, and the dirt under everyone's fingernails. "You were supposed to clear them out," Morgan said, tossing his gloves onto Caleb's table outside the tent. "Now I hear you're playing house with the daughter." Caleb did not reply. Morgan leaned closer, voice low and sharp. "You came here to own, not fall for some dirt-poor girl who smells like sap, or have you forgotten what we're building?" Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned back to the post he was sawing. Morgan scoffed and straightened. "Soft, just like your father." That night the first threat came. Jeremiah Dunn woke to find a portion of his fence burned. The next morning, Morgan's cattle wandered onto Dunn land, trampling bean shoots and scattering the hens. No apology came. Only Morgan, standing on the rise, hat tipped low, eyes cold. Caleb saw it all. But he said nothing, yet, not out of fear, nor agreement. He watched, measured, waited, as if weighing something heavier than just land. Rosalind kept to herself. She passed Caleb's tent just before dusk one evening. In her hands was a small bowl covered in cloth. She said nothing, only placed it gently on the crate by his tent flap. Then turned and walked away, her braid falling down her back like a line drawn in dust. Inside the bowl was early-season corn porridge, still warm. Caleb sat beside it for an hour without touching it. The steam faded. The bowl cooled. The next morning, as the sun broke over the ridge, Caleb returned the bowl, washed clean, placed carefully on her doorstep. He knocked once, left before she opened the door. Morgan noticed the exchange. "Charming," he sneered over breakfast. "You think sentiment can feed you when the winter sets in?" Caleb did not answer, but his hand, resting on the table, curled into a fist. Morgan's pressure continued. He sent men to trample the stream bed that fed the Dunn's irrigation channel. He let rumor slip that Jeremiah had squatted illegally, spreading lies through the town saloon. He visited the sheriff, dropping hints about a hostile elder clinging to land that was no longer his. And still, Caleb said nothing. Not when Jeremiah's barn roof caved in from a loosened beam. Not when Rosalind returned from market to find her woven baskets slashed. Not even when Morgan smirked at supper and said, "No one remembers poor people, Caleb. They only remember who holds the deed." But Caleb was remembering everything. He watched how Rosalind helped her father into his chair with both hands under his arms. He saw how she stitched her own dress cuffs with the leftover thread from saddle repair. He noticed how she scraped extra cornmeal into a tin for the widowed woman 2 farms over. She was not clinging to land for pride. She was holding on because it was the only thing that had ever held her. One morning, as Morgan's hired riders prepared to expand fencing lines past the old oak near the stream, Caleb stood in their path, silent, armed, and immovable. Morgan rode up behind him. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. Caleb did not look back. "Thinking." Morgan snarled. "Then think fast. I want this valley cleared." Caleb lowered his hand to rest on the butt of his revolver. "I am," he said. "I'm just not sure you'll like what I decide." And for the first time since Morgan had arrived, it was he who hesitated. Caleb Vane, quiet and measured, was no longer undecided. He was simply not yet done. They woke to a line of white burned across the soil. Salt, dumped heavy and deliberate, like a scar down the Dunn family's best crop row. Rosalind stared at it in silence. Jeremiah knelt beside it, running his fingers through the dead earth. The old man's shoulders shook, not with rage, but something slower, deeper. Rosalind helped him inside, but his steps faltered. Minutes later, he collapsed by the hearth. His lips were pale, his breath came shallow. Rosalind screamed. The doctor came from town, breathless. "Mild infarction," he muttered. "He needs rest, less worry, warm broth, and peace." Peace. On land, stripped bare. That night, Rosalind slipped a shawl over her shoulders and left the cabin without a word. The moon was low, cold light casting shadows through the pines. Her hands trembled with each knock against Caleb's tent pole. He opened the flap, eyes alert, shirt loose over his shoulders, boots half-laced. She stood there, hair unbraided, breath visible. "He's dying," she whispered. "He won't make it through another week of this." Caleb stepped aside. "Let her in." She didn't sit. She stood by the lantern, hands clenched. "I know who's doing it. Morgan. No one else would bother salting land at midnight." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Rosalind's voice broke. "You brought him." Caleb looked down. "I did." Her next words came jagged. "And now he's killing us." He looked at her. "Not anymore." The next day, Morgan swaggered through town, laughing with 2 ranch hands, spinning a coin over his knuckles. His hat was tilted too far back, and he leaned too hard on the word, "mine." Caleb waited on the porch of the supply store. When Morgan passed, Caleb didn't speak. He swung. The punch landed square on Morgan's cheek, knocking the hat clear off his head. Morgan recovered fast. Former boxer, quick hands, but Caleb fought like a man with nothing to prove and everything to protect. They traded blows in the dirt, fists connecting with ribs, jaws, knees bent, and backs arched. Dust rose like a signal fire. A crowd gathered. No one intervened. Morgan grabbed Caleb's shirt, snarling, "She's not worth this." Caleb slammed his forehead into Morgan's. Blood, a tooth in the dirt. "She's worth more than you'll ever be," he growled. They rolled into the water trough, breaking the edge, soaking both. Morgan drew a knife. Caleb caught his wrist and twisted hard. The blade clattered to the ground. Morgan lunged again, only to find a shotgun barrel between his eyes. The sheriff. He said one word, "Enough." Morgan was arrested that day, officially for disturbing the peace, unofficially for being an arrogant bastard. The town had had enough of his bribes, his threats, his scorched earth. By dusk, the train whistle screamed. Morgan was escorted out with a split lip and bruised ribs. Caleb stood in the middle of Main Street, shirt torn, blood on his temple, right eye swelling shut. He did not sway. Rosalind found him there. She said nothing. He didn't need her to. He looked at her as if every swing he'd thrown was a letter in a sentence he could never say out loud. But she heard it anyway. In the corner of the square, Jeremiah sat on a bench, wrapped in a wool blanket. His face was pale, but he was alive. Caleb helped him home that night, step by slow step. No land changed hands, but something else had. And it was more permanent than paper. The ash line from the fire still marred the edge of the field, blackened posts jutting like broken teeth from the earth. Caleb rose early, before sunrise, and began to work. He carried replacement beams on his shoulder. He dug new post holes. He tamped the soil with his boot, straight-backed and wordless. From her window, Rosalind watched. No one had asked him. He repaired the entire fence line by noon, sweat soaked into his collar. Then he fetched seed, his own, and walked the rows beside Jeremiah's porch, bending slowly, placing bean by bean into the dirt. He did not speak to Rosalind when she brought water. He only nodded once, then kept sowing. That evening, Jeremiah asked for his coat. It was the first time in weeks he had stood without help. His voice was steadier, though still thin. "Tell him I want to see him," he said. Caleb came, wiping dust from his sleeves. He stood by the old man's chair, unsure what to expect. Jeremiah didn't rise. He looked Caleb square in the eyes. "If you came here to take something," he said, "then I reckon you have." Caleb stiffened. Jeremiah continued, "Not the land, not my daughter, not even my peace." He pointed to the bean rows with a shaking hand. "You took something harder to earn." Caleb frowned. "What's that?" "My trust." The words hung there between them, fragile as spun sugar. "And I am not a man who gives that freely," Jeremiah added. Caleb's throat worked. "I was not trying to—" "I know," Jeremiah cut him off. "That's why it matters." Later that week, Caleb rode the North Ridge with his papers. He took measurements, studied the slope, brought back stones to mark boundary lines. He called Rosalind out and pointed to the ridge. "This half," he said, "I will keep, for planting, for living." He turned to her. "The other half stays yours, for your father, forever." Rosalind stared at him. "You are giving it back?" "I am claiming only what I need," Caleb said, "not what I can." She did not answer, not with words. But the next day, just before dusk, she came to his cabin. She was not crying. She did not hesitate. In her hands, she held a square of pale green cloth, worn at the corners, embroidered in a looping, uneven thread. She placed it on the table before him. "My mother stitched this," she said, "before she passed. She told me once, if I ever found a man who kept his dignity when no one would blame him for losing it, to give him this." Caleb did not touch it. She looked at him, her voice gentled. "I am giving it to you." He reached out, fingertips brushing the edge. The fabric was soft, old, and real. "So I did take something after all," he said quietly. Rosalind gave a small, tired smile. "Only what you earned." Outside, the wind picked up. It carried the scent of tilled soil and the coming rain. For the first time since he arrived, Caleb Vane did not feel like a trespasser. Not in the field, not in the cabin, not in her eyes. Just a man who had come with nothing and found something worth staying for. Spring came slow to the valley, bringing shoots of green along the furrows and warmth that softened the frost-bitten soil. Caleb and Rosalind worked the land as if they had always done so, shoulder to shoulder, yet never crossing a line unspoken. They did not share a roof, but they shared the dawn. Each morning, Rosalind left a tin cup of coffee on the step outside Caleb's cabin. Sometimes it was steaming, sometimes it had gone cool before he reached it, but he drank every drop, always. In return, he carved a slender plank of pine. On it, he etched her name with careful strokes, Rosalind. He nailed it to the edge of the boundary fence, facing both their homes. It said nothing of ownership, only presence. They sowed seed in silence and harmony. Caleb carried sacks of barley on his back. Rosalind drew lines in the soil with a steady hand. When Jeremiah could walk again, they took turns helping him to the wagon each Sunday, riding with him down into town, church bell echoing like a heartbeat across the valley. At the general store, whispers followed them, not scandalous ones but curious, murmuring things. "They ain't wed. No ring, no notice in the paper. But he fetches her sugar every Friday. And she mends his coat." To those who asked, Rosalind said little. She smiled, dipped her head, and went about her business. One afternoon, as Caleb loaded a crate of seed into a borrowed wagon, an old man with a dusty hat leaned on the hitch rail, watching him closely. The man squinted. "You're the one from the east, the Vane boy." "That's right," Caleb replied, brushing off his sleeves. The man jabbed a thumb toward the hill. "That land you're on, yours, is it?" Caleb paused. A breeze lifted his collar. He looked up at the slope, the furrows running in neat rows, the fence rebuilt, the little flag of fabric Rosalind had tied to the gate where birds sometimes landed. He smiled, just a little. "It's not mine." The man blinked. "You paid for it, did you not?" "I did." "Then whose is it?" Caleb hefted the crate into the wagon and turned, leaning on the side rail. "It belongs to those who plant it," he said. "Who water it, who wake before light and come home after dark. That land answers to their hands, not a deed." The old man rubbed his beard, then nodded slowly. "Not many'd say that." Caleb gave a single shrug. "Not many'd understand." He tipped his hat and drove off. That night Rosalind brought fresh bread. She left it in a clean towel by his door. In return, she found a small bundle wrapped in oilskin on her own step the next morning. Inside, a knife with her initials carved into the handle, balanced just right for her grip. No words, no notes, but everything was understood. Their lives ran parallel, tethered by labor and land, not bound by papers or vows, but by choice, made fresh each morning. At the well, children called them Mr. Caleb and Miss Rosalind. At church, they sat near, but not too close. When Rosalind sang, Caleb sometimes closed his eyes. And when spring broke into full bloom, with barley sprouting and the first beans curling up from the soil, the townsfolk stopped asking questions. They just started calling that stretch of ridge the Dun Vane line, not for ownership, but for what had grown there, and what kept growing. A year had passed. The July sun gilded the valley in golden light. Fields once dry and uncertain now shimmered with blooming crops. Wheat, corn, and beans swayed in rhythm with the wind. At the edge of the land, near the dusty trail that led through the mountains, stood a modest roadside stop. Rosalind had built it herself. Travelers paused there now, for the cornbread, warm, flaky, touched with honey, for the reading lessons she gave to local children under the shade of the canvas awning, for the stories shared over black coffee poured by a woman with weathered hands and steady eyes who smiled, not out of habit, but out of peace. Caleb sat on the front steps of the cabin, carving a fence post from pine. His shirt was faded from months beneath the sun, sleeves rolled up. His hair was longer now, brushing the back of his neck. His gaze, once flinty and fierce, had softened into something deeper, like the quiet at the bottom of a well. That afternoon, as cicadas hummed in the trees, Rosalind came to stand beside him. She watched the fence lines stretch toward the hills where wildflowers now grew untamed. Then she said, softly, "You came here to take. What do you think about it all now?" Caleb paused his carving. He looked toward the old Dunn homestead, where Jeremiah now sat in a handmade rocker on the porch, watching over a pair of giggling grandchildren who had stopped by with their parents from town. Caleb wiped the shavings from his hands and replied, "I think some things aren't meant to be taken. Some things are meant to be kept." The wedding was quiet. No church bells, no lace veil, no silver rings, just two people standing barefoot in the field they had saved, hands joined beneath the wide Wyoming sky. The preacher from town chuckled as he opened his book, nodding at the crowd of familiar faces, ranchers, school teachers, blacksmiths, and stable hands. "Never seen a couple sign a marriage with this many smiles," he said. And that was enough. Later that week, at the county clerk's office, Caleb handed over the land deed and signed a new one. Half of it now bore the name Rosalind Dunn Vane, not out of obligation, not out of debt, but out of respect. "You earned every inch of this place long before I arrived," Caleb said, watching her sign with steady fingers. She said nothing, just nodded, then slipped her hand into his. Harvest season came again. Together, they scattered new seeds, this time not just for food, but for the future. They worked side by side beneath the crisp autumn sky, planting with hands that knew both hardship and healing. Rosalind's laugh rose often, sharp and clear as bells. Caleb answered with quiet looks, a thumb brushing her cheek, the soft tap of his hat against her brow. When a visitor passing through asked the old rancher in town, "So who owns that land now?" the man simply pointed to the hill, where two silhouettes bent low over the earth, a basket of seeds between them. Rosalind looked up, smiled, and leaned into Caleb's shoulder. She answered without hesitation, "It belongs to the ones who chose each other, not for land, but for love." And the wind carried her words across the field, where no title could reach and no law could bind, just heart, soil, and two people who finally knew what it meant to stay. And so, on a stretch of land no title could bind and no law could truly own, two hearts built something not with bricks, but with grace, unspoken, unshaken, and deeply earned. Caleb came to claim what he thought was his. But what he found was worth far more, a life he did not expect, a love he did not demand, and a woman who gave freely only when she chose to. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that love is not always loud, but it always leaves roots, then go ahead and tap that hype button, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, and ring that bell so you never miss another tale from the dusty roads and quiet miracles of the American frontier. Until next time, ride steady and love braver.